If we're going to ask the members of council to come, we're about to... Start our hearing. Good morning. Can I have everybody's attention, please? This hearing is called to order. I recognize this is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bill numbers 190152, 190153, 190154, and resolution number 190164. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and the resolution.
Bill number 190152, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2020 through 2025 inclusive. Bill number 190153, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2020 capital budget. Bill number 190154, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2020. Resolution number 190164, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2020 through 2024 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2019, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the Authority, pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this Council, approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the Authority.
Thank you. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by Mr. Stitt that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal year 2020, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal year 2020 through fiscal year 2025. Today we hear testimony from these city departments, the 1st Judicial District, District Attorney, Law Department, and Defender Association, which promises to be a long day, may I add. The first person to testify today, Mr. Stitt, is
Honorable Judge Fox.
Good morning, Your Honor and team. We have your written testimony, so whatever you'd like to add, and then we'll open to questions, Your Honor.
Good morning. My name is Heidi Fox, and as of November of last year, I was elected the President Judge of the 1st Judicial District.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And the Chair of the Administrative Governing Board. Let me start by saying, as a Philadelphia native and a public school graduate, a Girls High girl, I'm very proud to be here today, and this is a real honor. I'm here on behalf of my colleagues of the Administrative Governing Board, Judge Dugan, President Judge of Municipal Court, Judge Jackie Allen, Administrative Judge of the Trial Division, Judge Margaret T. Murphy, the Administrative Judge of the Family Court Division, Judge Matthew D. Carafiello, the Administrative Judge of the Orphans Court, Judge Gary Glazer, the Administrative Judge of the Traffic Division, and Joe Evers, the District Court Administrator. Also in attendance next to me is Kevin Cross, our Deputy Court Administrator, to answer any questions from members of the City Council about the 1st Judicial District budget request. The courts of the 1st Judicial District adjudicate cases and resolve disputes following the statutory and legal requirements subject to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and ensure fair and timely disposition with accessible justice to the citizens and litigants of the City and County of Philadelphia. This testimony will highlight innovative programs implemented to shorten the distance between our court and our community, emphasize the FJD's commitment to partnering with other justice agencies to achieve unprecedented results in reducing prison population, effectuate other criminal justice reforms, and illustrate our dedication to supportive services to aid and assist our most vulnerable citizens, seniors, people experiencing behavioral health challenges, and children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our courts and our judges reflect the values of our communities and understand the challenges facing the people who appear in our courtrooms. We remain committed to fairness, equity, and shortening the distance between the court and the community. Fairness and due process are constitutionally rooted concepts and serve as the foundation of the laws of all citizens, that all citizens want equally and fairly applied, no matter their race, religion, gender, or socioeconomic condition. The role of the judiciary is to ensure that fairness and due process apply to all. I am proud to work alongside judges who are dedicated to the maintenance of the dignity of our courts and committed to fairness and equal protection. Our citizens have a right to their day in court, and they can trust that the judge presiding over their case will be even-handed, fair, and impartial. Our city is fortunate to be comprised of a diverse urban population, and the FJD is committed to providing fair and equal employment representative of this diversity. To achieve this goal, we have retained the services of a diversity inclusion consultant to survey and assess the structural and cultural barriers that affect the diversity of our staff. We hope the resultant report will contain recommendations for training of staff and the judiciary so as to ensure that as we move forward, our employees are representative of the diverse population of our city. 4 years ago, the Criminal Justice Advisory Board instructed the Justice Partners to collaboratively submit an application to the MacArthur Foundation. I know that you've heard a lot about the MacArthur Foundation. This grant has been a real asset to the courts and the Justice Partners. Since the submission of the initial application, the FJD has been the forefront of the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge strategies taking place in Philadelphia. Today, our dedication to the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge remains steadfast. One of the most successful initiatives under the MacArthur umbrella is Municipal Courts' Early Bail Review Program. This collaborative effort revisits initial bail decisions made at arraignment and allows for an in-depth screening of candidates by the Justice Partners. Within 1 to 5 days of incarceration, individuals in custody at the prison who have cash bail amounts of $50,000 or less are charged with nonviolent misdemeanors and have no other holds or detainers are eligible for early bail review hearings, at which most, 87.5% of the people who come before these hearings are released. This has increased now to those being held for cash bail amounts of $100,000 or less. The Detainer Alternative Program is a MacArthur initiative implemented by adult probation and parole in conjunction with the Justice Partners. This alternative to incarceration provides eligible offenders substance abuse treatment and other supportive services coupled with a graduated sanction component if needed. As of February 2019, 278 participants completed the program. This is a small sample of MacArthur reform strategies led by the FJD. Lastly, as part of MacArthur's safety and justice challenges to reduce racial and ethnic disparities in criminal justice system, all current and future FJD employees will partake in an implicit and explicit bias training. Components of the training include role-playing, videos, group activities based on vignettes relevant to each agency, and presentation of science surrounding biases people have. The FJD has completed Train the Trainer program, which provided training to select employees and judges who can now continuously deliver training to other existing staff and new hires. The MacArthur Initiative are not the only efforts being taken by the court to increase access to justice and reform the system. One such endeavor was the discontinuance of the collection of cash bail fees. In October 2018, the FJD and the city's Criminal Justice Advisory Board ended the policy of retaining 30% of cash bail posted to secure a defendant's release from custody, pending the final disposition of the case. This fee was previously paid to the city's general fund. The court concluded that the interest of justice would be best served if the entire amount of cash bail posted to secure a defendant's release was returned. I'm going to jump ahead to the issue of in March of 2019, the PreTrial Services and Adult Probation and Parole Department opened its new facility at 714 Market Street and vacated its previous location at 1401 Arch Street. This location was selected for its cost effectiveness, proximity to public transportation, its design efficiencies, including a more accommodating client-oriented environment with a centralized lobby space to allow clients to wait inside the building. Also, internal waiting and interview rooms which provide easier access to supervising officers. Also, the cashier's window has street access so that clients do not have to enter the main building to make payments. Our commitment to specialty courts continues. Specialty courts and diversion programs are to assist and provide alternative to incarceration for care for screened defendants. Instead of confinement, defendants are provided counseling, treatment for any addiction or mental health illness, educational assistance, and health care support. While the progress of each participating defendant is strictly monitored by a judge, success is predicated upon a partnership between the defendant, the court, and numerous caseworkers and service providers. Philadelphia Family Court Juvenile Probation Department remains a leader in providing critical probation services to youth and families and strives to promote policies and reforms consistent with the mission of the juvenile justice system in Pennsylvania. Outcomes for Pennsylvania's most disadvantaged youth while under probation supervision continue to trend positively in 2018, including approximately 32,000 successful contacts with youth and families through office, school, residential, and community site visits, approximately 23,000 hours of meaningful community service and completed by youth. Over 800 youth, while in residential care, received either a high school diploma, a GED certificate, or a vocational certificate through juvenile probation's commitment to academic achievement and vocational training. Dedicated diversionary efforts supported through court and stakeholder programs collectively diverted 508 youth from further penetration into the juvenile justice system. As to evictions and landlord-tenant matters, the court has implementing task force. The Philadelphia Bar Association formed the Civil Gideon Access to Justice Task Force. A number of our judges are included as members. The court, in implementing task force suggestions, reviewed and updated its forms, educated judges and court staff about licenses and certificates required by city ordinances, and continued efforts to ensure that the court is accessible. The court further believes expanding rental assistance and housing subsidies would have a beneficial effect on reducing evictions. In addition, the municipal court is partnering with the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Program, a city-funded program that provides information to both landlords and tenants. These services include expanding the help center, the presence of a courtroom navigator, and a lawyer for the day program. The court worked with PEP on the creation of a revised resource guide and modified the informative videos. Municipal court also provides a private office to meet with represented tenants, modified the initial statement read by the trial commissioner to advise litigants about the lawyer for the day program and the court navigator, and arranged a secure space for the program to maintain and store files. In the Orphans Court Division, the Guardian Tracking System, to quote Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice Deborah Todd, Pennsylvania ranks fourth in the nation for the highest population percentage of elders, and the Commonwealth's aging population continues to grow. It is increasingly important to ensure the protection of some of our most vulnerable citizens. The Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts developed a web-based guardian tracking system in which court-appointed guardians of adults of all ages, court staff, and judges can file, manage, track, and submit guardianship reports. This initiative is intended to protect vulnerable citizens, improve how the court monitors guardians, and ensures potential problems are identified and responded to quickly. One item I'd like to add is families protect families. They take care of families. And in the guardianship program, oftentimes it's a family member not really familiar with the requirements of this guardian tracking system. Mm-hmm. The court is working to provide access and information to family members so that they can prepare maintain the records that they need and properly prepare these forms. In March of 2017, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania adopted a comprehensive plan to improve access to justice for those with limited English proficiencies and those who are hearing impaired. The Language Access Plan is designed to guide the judiciary in meeting language challenges brought by the growing diversity of Pennsylvania's population. It further solidifies the Supreme Court's commitment to fair and equal access to justice by providing quality language access services to non-English speaking and hearing impaired court users.
Your Honor, if I could just ask because we want to get to questions, do you have much more you would like to add?
You're getting tired of me reading here, are you? Okay, I'm good. Then I will simply say, the only thing I'd like to add is the FJD does seek parity with other city agencies regarding our law clerk salary.
That was going to be our first question, by the way.
Okay. The increase afforded to these other agencies puts the FJD at a disadvantage when seeking entry-level attorneys for law clerks.
Okay.
So, I'll conclude there and wait for your question.
On that line, Your
Okay.
Honor, leads right into the first question I know the Council President wanted to ask. Your budget proposal includes $957,000 in funding not included in the mayor's proposed budget. And specifically, what are the differences in the mayor's proposal and your proposal regarding the law clerk pay equity? I think the administration included $250,000 for pay parity. So could you explain the differences there, please? Or somebody?
Hello, my name is Kevin Cross, Deputy Court Administrator. We're seeking $1.2 million in total for the pay parity for the law clerks. Mm-hmm. The administration has provided $250,000, so we're seeking an additional $957,000 that would enable us to bring the salaries of our law clerks closer to those of our justice partners in the district attorney's office, the public defender's office, and also in the law department.
So you need that much just to
Yes.
be equal? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
We have 109 law clerks in various different capacities.
Mm-hmm. Has there been, because obviously that's a big difference. The administration seems to think that that's $250,000 will do it, clearly. Has there been discussion with the administration on that? It's a big difference, obviously.
Yes, we are working with the administration and trying to negotiate a settlement or an agreeable amount that we both can work with.
Okay, all right. Good luck.
Thank you.
I know your department is structured differently because you're relationship both with the city and the state, and I think there's a zero growth budget requirement. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
That's a state requirement, correct? Yeah.
It's an agreement that's an ongoing agreement with the city administration now. It started as a state requirement
Okay.
and now has been just an agreement that has been upheld between the administration and the court system.
Okay. Now, can the courts roll over unspent funds from one year to the next if you have such?
Yes,
Yeah.
we have the ability to retain our savings at the end of each fiscal year.
Okay, and have you been able to do much of that, or is that?
We were able to roll over funds last year into FY20, yes.
Okay, about how much, do you know?
It was about $5.9 million last year.
Okay, so they're held over and are used proposed for this year, right?
The court system, the FJD, is not like other city agencies and said we don't have a capital budget. We have to pay our IT, our technology expenses internally. So we use those funds for major facilities projects, for IT-based projects, and for technology projects.
Okay.
One of the most current projects was the move from 1401 Arch Street to 714 Market Street, which is going to cost us about $2.5 million. So that's pretty much been funded internally through these carried over merge funds.
Okay, all right. One thing I think frustrates a whole lot of folks, there's been 2 Supreme Court rulings that it's the state's responsibility to fund, and I'll quote, direct court employees and for personal court-related offices. They haven't been doing that. Has there been discussion with the state on this? Because obviously, that might solve some of our differences in our budget discussions. I guess the question is, have you had better luck than we have?
I think the response is no.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay.
So, that is certainly one of our more frustrating circumstances, I'm sure with you folks too, so. One last thing, now I'll turn to Councilman Dom. I'll do what the council president usually does. Pure advertising here. He has a proposal here narrowing the gap. And one thing has to do with something in the court, which is eliminating punitive supervision fees. You familiar with what I'm talking about? Or
In adult probation?
Yeah. Could you... Because it says, I'm reading this, the First Judicial District requires that all fines and fees be paid before these records can be expunged. Mm-hmm. And because of this policy, it certainly hurts, lower income people. What's your position on that? The report says, changing that could have significant benefit for those, again, as we try to narrow the gap for poor people, so.
It affects a few things with legislation, clean slate legislation regarding your ability to either seal your record or for expungement. Those fees and those fines and costs are there. That's something we grapple with because some of these are mandated by state law that we have no control over. And that's been an issue that we've been discussing and trying to resolve. So it is something that is on our radar. We're very aware of it and trying to work through ways that we can deal with that.
Okay, all right. And if you could keep particularly the council president apprised of that, because I know it's something he feels strongly about. I know Councilwoman Reynolds Brown's not here. She had a number of questions regarding child care and in the courts, and I know you have some answers on that. But before we do that, I want to turn to Councilman Dom. Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning.
Good morning, Councilman.
I want to go back to Chairman Greenlee's question on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision from 1987, where the state's supposed to fund the payroll costs of the First Judicial District, and it was reiterated in 1996. And I'm trying to figure out, because it says in our budget this year, we provided $106 million in personnel costs, excluding benefits. In 2017 and 2018, do you know how much in dollars the city's general fund paid to the First Judicial District?
Our budget amount for fiscal year 19 is about $107 million.
No, I'm saying in 17 and 18, what were the actual dollars that came out of the city's budget to fund the court system?
I'll have to look that up to get that exact amount for you,
Because
Councilman.
I'd like to know the exact amount.
Okay.
17 and 18. Because I'm looking at this and saying $106 million is in personnel costs, and then in your testimony on page 11, you have some tables, table 1 and table 2 in the testimony, and it looks like there's reimbursement and grant and aid from other governments. Is that from the state?
That's from the state and the federal government, yes.
And that's like $15 million?
Correct.
And then there's filing fees, fines, and costs,
Correct.
33. Is that a realistic number?
Yes, that's collection of filing fees and fines and costs.
Then it says Jenkins Law Library fees collected and paid on the city's behalf is $3 million.
Yes, that's for my filing fee, that the city doesn't have to pay for a public library, public law library.
And what is waived fees for city agencies, $5.3 million?
Other city agencies, like the law department, don't have to pay filing fees to file petitions and matters with the court.
So what you're basically saying is that the fund budget amounts to $169 million. That's your total dollars.
That's our general fund and grant revenue budget.
Right. And so I'm trying to understand the numbers. It says here that there's 58, I guess total revenue from offsets is 57.8 million.
Yes,
And then you're using grants revenue of 52.5 million.
52.5, correct, yes.
And has that been the case for the last few years?
It has been consistent, yes, around $50 million.
So I'd like to see that detail for 17 and 18.
Sure.
And so what you're saying is with a combination of the grants revenue budget, the combination of these fees that are being reimbursed, the cost to the city is 58.6 million.
Correct.
And it's been that way for a while, I assume.
It's been consistent, yes.
And that's what Councilman Greenlee's referring to, I guess, that should be picked up by the state. And over the last 23 years, sounds like it's over $1 billion that should have been picked up by the state. And why are we not enforcing that?
I don't think, well, again, we're not enforcing it because we can't enforce something against the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court dictates to us. We don't dictate to the Supreme Court.
But it's reaffirmed. It was passed, it was reaffirmed. We have no recourse to say, you know what, you're supposed to be paying these costs.
Well, Councilman, I can't give you legal advice as to what recourse you have, but we don't have that recourse as a court.
Do we as a city have that recourse?
I can't advise you that. I can't answer that question.
Because if it was averaging this number over 20...
That would be giving you legal advice, and that I can't do.
Okay. It's just a lot of money that costing the city, which can't afford it, which the state's supposed to fund. It's over $1 billion probably in 23 years. Okay, let me ask a few other questions. How much do you expect to bring in? Well, this is your budget, so I guess that's what you're expecting to bring in is $33 million this year, roughly?
For the filing fees and fines and costs, that's an accurate assessment, yes, an accurate projection.
And that all goes to your cost of operating the courts.
That goes to the city's general fund, yes.
And what happens if someone fails to pay a court-ordered fine or fee? Are they reincarcerated if they fail to pay? What happens? What is the action that occurs?
Well, if it's a fine or fee, part of the issue that has to be done by the analysis that has to be done by the judge is whether or not at that moment that person is economically able to pay that fine and fee. If it's not, no, you cannot incarcerate.
I guess a lot of my questions I'm going to ask have to do with, are we hurting people with the system by punishing them if they can't afford it, shows up on their credit report, just puts them deeper into poverty and prevents them from getting back onto the right course?
Again, as I said previously to the issue of fines and costs and those being there and how we deal with them, some of these are mandated by state law. The FJD is grappling with that issue, especially with now the enactment of Clean Slate and trying to deal with that to allow people to seal their records or expunge their records. So I think that's an issue that we're trying to address. How much ability we have may depend more on the state legislature than with us as the court or even the city council.
In your budget, how much does it cost? What's the allocation for the collection of these fines and fees and so forth? What is your allocated cost for that work?
The collection of the fines and fees are done through the Office of Judicial Records. And the budget for their job is also to accept filings and to staff courtrooms with court clerks. But the overall budget is about $5 million.
I ask that question because in the last 10 years or so, there have been $427 million of fines and fees restitution and $123 million collected. And in the past year, 2018, we collected $5.8 million of $23 million outstanding that was charged in that year. And my question, I guess, is, again, is there a better way to do this? and maybe we should revisit this whole system, okay, because it might be actually costing us more than what we're collecting at the end of the day. And it might be a better way to treat people than having them pay money which they can't afford and just putting them deeper into poverty, which is crazy. So I think that whole system needs to be revamped personally, because I don't think we're helping people. I think we're hurting them with this system.
Thank you.
Does the court assess the defendant's ability to pay prior to charging them fees?
So when you're talking about fees, and I think we're using different language in a criminal matter, the judge, in finding someone guilty, the judge is mandated to assess certain costs and fees. There are certain costs and fees that a judge can choose to waive, but right now there is some issue as to whether or not that has to be done, the ability to pay assessments done then or when it hasn't been collected and there's some attempt to enforce.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll come back on the next round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. And let me get some of Councilwoman Reynolds Brown's questions in here. And again, it goes to an issue that she brings up many times here with different departments dealing with diversity and inclusion. She notes in a 2016 report, the Pennsylvania Interbranch Commission for Gender, Racial, and Ethnic Fairness found that there is lack of diversity in a lot of the jury pools. And part of that is that poor people, particularly women, are unable to serve on jury duty, dealing with child care, that kind of thing. Has the courts looked into this, and is there any programs to try to help? Particularly, one of the things is that suggested is, and I think Allegheny County and Montgomery County already have a child care facility. Is that something you folks have looked into at all?
It is, in the sense that Allegheny County and Montgomery County are a courthouse located in one location. Their family court, their criminal courts, and the civil courts are all in one location, not so much Allegheny County. But one of the problems we have is there is a court nursery at family court for families going there. I guess we've not been confronted with the issue of someone saying, can I use that nursery? Today it's in a different location. Judge Allen, the administrative judge, did form a commission to look into jury service and the lack of participation, not just by diversity, but the citizens of Philadelphia. Serving on a jury is extremely important. People participating in it is extremely important to the courts. There were a number of factors that were addressed by that commission. One of the problems we have is we pay, by state law, $9 a day to a juror, and then if it's more than one day, it jumps up, I think, to 23.
Right.
But that's really hard. I think the problem is also with people in their employment. We also have concerns about people having transportation money to come into Center City. It's extremely expensive to park your car, or even to take a train, or to take a bus or a subway. So yes, it is something we are continuing our trying to bring as many people into jury service as we can.
Okay, all right. And along the same lines, the councilwoman asked that, or notes that the mayor established a juror participation initiative committee. Is that the same thing that you were referring to with Judge Allen?
Yes.
So the question was, so the court is involved with that initiative,
yes,
right? With that committee? So that's what you're... Now, do you know where that is? Has there been an actual report given, or?
I believe there was a report given, not this past year. I'm not sure, but we'll get back to you on that. If there was, we could provide a copy.
Okay, yeah, if you could, that would be great. And just on that child care, so the thinking, is that something you're looking into?
Well, again, it's something we looked into, but it can be extremely expensive to maintain a child care. I mean, at one time, I think the federal courts had a child care facility in their building, and it got closed down. It's extremely expensive with insurance. It's extremely expensive to maintain, and it's a matter of finding space for it.
Right.
Oftentimes what it is training judges for us. Oftentimes both parents are working and children are in daycare, and we have to be very sensitive and let the jury go by a certain time so everybody can pick up their children after school.
Mm-hmm. And again, just on that note, and then we'll go to other questions here. And again, this is Councilwoman's question, so bear with me if I'm not saying this exactly right. it's her understanding that there was I guess this is a court decision, that a child care facility for use by children whose parents or guardians are present in the county judicial center or courtroom or other matters related to any civil or criminal action where the person's presence has been requested is necessary, that the law entails that an additional fee of $5 may be collected by the prothonotary clerk of court or register of wills. Are you familiar with this? Or
I think the councilwoman's referring to a statute, and there's some issue as to whether or not that statute applies to existing buildings or new buildings. So again, she called that to our attention. We're looking into that. And again, that's another conflict we have regarding raising how we assess fees and costs.
It's all about money, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Amazing how it gets back to that. Yeah. And and there has actually been a cost analysis done on that, or has there
Yeah.
yet? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do you plan to do something on that? Or?
Again, I'm not sure, because again, what we look at is there are other expenses there are other factors that we consider may stop or prevent a person from participating in jury duty. And if we could easily start to do a cost assessment on the daycare question. But again, there are other issues.
Other things, right.
That we think the car fare and I date myself by saying car fare, but the car fare and the parking and the other costs, and just that what we...
All adds up. I
Yeah.
get you. Yeah, I get you. But obviously, diversity on the jury pool is very necessary, too. So
Yes.
I noticed that. Now, she may have more detail, and I'm going to ask her, maybe she could put that in writing to you, and you could respond.
We have been talking to her about it.
Okay. All right, great. I appreciate that, Your Honor. Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning. Looking through your testimony, going back to the testimony again, I noticed that you may have a consistent theme of shortening the distance between the court and community. I had a question in reference to the status of your risk assessment tool that you're building for pretrial decisions here in Philadelphia. Can you provide some perspective? I didn't see that in the testimony, so if you could provide some perspective regarding that.
The risk assessment tool is a fairly early in its development. It's part of the MacArthur grant as far as trying to come up with a risk assessment tool. There are parts of it that are being developed, and we're open to discussions regarding it, but we're not at the point with anything regarding a risk assessment tool that we're ready to say, here's what we're going to do. The court believes in transparency and participation of all appropriate parties in any development. And the development of any risk tool is one part of an entire program, whether you call it bail reform or any other type of program.
And just for the record, why do you see the benefit of this type of risk assessment tool?
Well, the hope would be that it would take out implicit and explicit biases in determining bail by making other factors. If you use a risk tool as a method to determine who stays in, then it could easily be mishandled. But if you look at it as the risk tool for releasing people and as one factor for someone to look at, then to me it could be a benefit. But how that is, I can't answer that yet. The purpose to me would be to, one, in developing it, is to have full transparency and participation, and to make sure that it is constantly subject to review.
And when you say full transparency, bless you, when you say full transparency, who will be able to participate in this transparent process?
Well, I believe that there was, in the panel that's being developed, they would be national experts, and I don't have that in front of me. I could send that to you, but it would be national experts as well as participation of PD and the DA's office.
Okay. So you're talking transparency from a perspective of law enforcement, but what about from the executive branch, legislative branch, community? How would they participate in this type of?
Again, I can't fully answer that question because we're such in an early
Well,
stage.
you're early
that I
stage,
can't
but do you
answer.
envision
But
an opportunity?
If you would ask me, it would be that everybody would be part of that. I think that's important.
So would you have, although it's early in the process, you're still planning, but could you provide some perspective in reference to the ability for the community to engage as well as the executive and legislative branch in this type of assessment tool?
Why not? Yes.
Okay. Would you provide, as you're putting together this process to define an assessment tool, would you be willing to provide others an opportunity to see what you're thinking about in reference to decision-making towards a tool?
I think all of the partners that are there are going to be there to see that, and they will make that available to everyone who's going to ask us and ask them as well. So yes, I think that'll be very apparent to everyone, what the factors are.
Right, so then another question I have in reference to this tool, and you talked about implicit bias. Are there going to be algorithms or other type of means for the tool?
Bear with me. Just because the moment you say the term algorithms, then you're going to talk a language that I don't talk. And I apologize for that. I can get you more information about that. But as I said, it's so early in its development for me to say what it's going to include and not include would really be a disservice.
Well, when you talk about a tool, you may include some type of technology or other type of mechanism that can help define risk outside an individual. And so what I'm saying is that when you're using technology, those who craft that technology, they themselves may have their own implicit biases, which may be embedded in that technology that's being used.
I don't disagree with that. That's why I think you have the people who are crafting that can't just be one individual who I'm saying this person is not. I think we all have different roles in this. So by varying who's participating in developing these tools, you make sure you have a voice from as many people as possible.
Well, the reason I raise the question because I think there's a perspective that if you're using some type of technology, that in itself, by using technology, is not going to have implicit bias because you're moving from a human interaction to a technology perspective, but there's still people creating that technology, and they themselves may have their own implicit bias. There have been, if I could finish, there's been aspects you've seen both from issues in Silicon Valley and others where coding and other type of algorithms, even in the employment perspective in some industries in this country where that has been an issue. So what I'm saying for the record that just because a technology is used, that's some type of algorithm or other type of methodology that may be scientific based, there's still someone or some people that help create that either coding or system that have their own perspective, maybe implicit bias that may be embedded into that, even though people will use the perspective because it's coming from a technological perspective, you're not going to have bias.
I'm not sure your question is.
No, I'm just putting that on the record that my concern is that I've been hearing
I
from
think
various people about using,
right.
and it's more so what I've been hearing in other jurisdictions who are putting together a risk assessment tool where they've been using technology, using some type of algorithm. And the perspective of what I've heard is that because you're using this algorithm that's taking out bias, but there's still bias embedded in that because people came up with the algorithm and they're using the algorithm for the risk assessment. So you're not automatically just getting rid of bias just because you're using some type of algorithm.
Thank you, Councilman. I think that's a valid point that we have to consider.
And my further, you did talk about having transparency, but I'm hearing transparency just from law enforcement perspective, but I didn't hear the opportunity for transparency, and I understand it's still early in the process, that's why I'm putting this on the record, but I didn't hear the aspect of transparency from both the executive branch, which as my colleague, Councilmember Dom, stated that we fund FJD, although we should not be funding, but that's a separate issue, but as well as the legislative branch, and then also the community as a whole, because the community and the citizens in the city of Philadelphia will be impacted by this new type of tool you're using for PreTrial Services. So I'm saying these things for the record that as you move into this process, it's really incumbent of First Judicial District to have a process that's going to be inclusive, because you will be back here next year during the budget process, and these questions will come up again by others in this body asking what is the transparency, considering you're talking about shortening the distance between the court and the community, allowing the community to participate in a new tool that's going to impact people in the city of Philadelphia. I have some additional questions, but I'll defer to others.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to my earlier questions for a minute. I just want to make sure that you were aware that most of these questions were around probation and parole fees. That's what my focus was. And so looking, and I have the collection rates for the last 10 years, but with the collection rates basically under 30% for the last 10 years, there might be a better way to do this, and this is my whole line of questioning, which is by either reducing or eliminating the probation and parole fees, which could help increase the amount collected for court-ordered restitution payments. Or also seems to me we could also do an analysis and save on our collection costs. I don't know how much we're spending right now for collection costs, but that may be an analysis we should do. The recidivism rates may go down if we have lower fees. And then the poverty-inducing effects of unpayable debts, if we could reduce or eliminate those fees associated with probation and parole. And my question is this something that you can undertake as a study to see if we dramatically change this, will it have a positive effect?
So there are parts of it, when you say undertake as a study, that may be different because a study to me means something different. We always look at what we're doing and how we're doing it. And as I said previously, the issue of cost and fines and fees is something that we are looking at, and we will continue to look at.
I mean, I'd be in favor of instead of assessing someone a fine or a fee or on the probation and parole fees, if they would utilize that money for job training, for example, and get them back on track. That's where we should be more productive. And so that's something that I think we should really take a good look at, because I'm not sure what the collection costs are, but clearly at 29, 28, 27% collection rates, we should look at this and see maybe we cut them in half, cut them up two-thirds out, whatever it is. We don't want to be making money on this situation. What we're trying to do is get them on the right track. I'd rather take the money and put it into re-education for job training.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Parker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to each of you. I want to go back to some questions that I asked last year, and the first is about the issue of the Elder Care Resource Center. Since it opened in October of 2016, how many seniors have you served?
I don't have that number in front of me today. I could get you that number. We are actually trying to expand the use of that center. One of the issues that we're trying to address, we did ask the National Center for State Courts to come in and do an analysis of what additional resources that needs to make it more accessible. The other thing that's coming up now is with the guardian tracking system, making sure that families take care of families. So oftentimes, daughters taking care of mother, they're both within that category of elderly, and daughter now has to file these reports and just isn't sure. So we're looking at resources we can make available at that center to assist people in preparing those reports and also assist these family members who are guardians to know what type of records they need to keep.
So in essence, it's referred to as the Elder Care Resource Center, but would you say it doesn't simply serve seniors and or those are elderly, but you serve those out?
I think they do keep records of seniors, but I think we've expanded it so that it's Elder Resource Center and Elder and Civil Resource Center.
Elder and Civil, okay, all right. That's important because
Right.
we don't want people to simply think that it's
They're not
just
turned away if they're
Right.
under a certain age.
Right, right. Let me ask you about the mortgage foreclosure diversion program. Is your data kept in such a way that you could provide this council with a quote-unquote average profile of the individuals who are being served via the mortgage foreclosure diversion program?
When you say the profile of the individuals, I'm not sure.
So are we able to say, of all who've gone through the mortgage foreclosure diversion program, we can tell you that we have X number of this race and or ethnicity, X number coming from this region of the city, X number who are seniors, X who are Gen Xers, X who's, like, is there a way we can do that?
So we can and we can't at the same time, because one of the problems is that it's the bank filing the action. So the bank doesn't tell us, even though we try to keep records of when a party's over a certain age that qualifies as a senior, the bank doesn't tell us that. Then when the person comes in, it's somewhat, we don't ask people their age, and we don't ask people, we try to ask them their age so we can keep a record of that, but we don't ask the other questions to keep that type of information. Now, neighborhood, by what part of the community, that we probably could keep a record of just by taking it down by address.
So that would be really helpful to us, and maybe if we started and we could GIS that on a map, I know that would be very helpful for district council members, because we are always trying to figure out a sort of a data-driven, research-based way of what kind of programs and services we are going to be targeting in certain regions. So, if I represent, Rittenhouse Square, I don't necessarily need to have an event, dealing with the challenge of reverse mortgages, right? I could be making a decision about what I do and where based on this information.
Okay.
So if you could provide that to the council, that would be helpful.
That may take us a little while moving forward to try to, we may not be able to backtrack, but we'll try to. But moving forward, we could try to develop a way to keep that information.
Finally, for the salaries for probation officers, during the 2016 budget hearing, that was for fiscal year 17, I asked about whether or not it was possible to make the salaries for probation officers more competitive, so that we don't lose, like on average, about 20 to 25 per year. During that time, that was the response that I received, and I think that was like out of almost 280. So are you like looking into retention strategies, or is this like a problem of the past and we don't have that challenge? Would you be familiar with that at all?
I am not, and I would have to get back to you on that, because I'm not familiar in the sense that it has not been called to my attention that we have a high turnover rate that's causing a problem. But we can look into that and see what the turnover rate was in the last year.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also just want to note for the record, Judge Sheila Skipper Woods had an event, I think it was probably about a month ago. I know I and several of my colleagues, they were members from the private sector, and they brought a litany of young people here to City Hall so we could, in essence, talk about what we do for a living, just expose them to what happens in this building and in the First Judicial District. And it was great seeing these young people there. So I just want to encourage you all, whenever we can, to get young people here in City Hall to find out what it is that you do, what career options are available. That would be very helpful, and I would want to be supportive of any kind of efforts.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I want you to know that we do, our judiciary is very active in bringing kids into their courtrooms. I think, in fact, on Law Day, the barristers just sent a request out to judges that they open their courtrooms to kids who are coming into court that day. So, yeah, we really do encourage that.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Jones. You're the first timer here. There, others are.
Good morning. How's everybody?
Good morning.
I guess what I want to talk about is how we're evolving as a judicial system as it relates to some of the recommendations from the Justice Reform Committee and how that is helping you. That's my first question. And then, how much projected savings are we having, and how can we get some of those savings back to your department and the justice system to make sure that it primes the pump for more savings and reform?
So one has that. So it has been a great asset to the court to be able to move forward with criminal justice reform with its partners, and be able to discuss issues openly and honestly with each other. Not always agree, but to be able to do that and move to where we are today. I was speaking to someone just recently. I've been a judge for 20 years, and I'm not going to talk about how many years I was a lawyer before that, but the world has changed. And to see the level of cooperation and moving forward with trying to reform the criminal justice system, to me, is really inspirational. I think in our report we talk about some of the savings that we believe by the reduction in in incarcerated population that we've saved, as to getting those resources back. Clearly, we try to provide services to people, and any sort of service costs money, and it really requires a collaboration of a lot of different resources and a lot of different agencies.
So I'm going to say it very differently. If you find savings within your department and those pathways to those savings are working, we don't want to, I don't think it would be prudent for us to exhaust those savings in a way that kills the goose that laid the golden egg. Meaning that if we're doing diversion, let's do more diversion. If we're doing different streamlinings of a process, we should encourage that continued behavior so that we don't get into silos where we're all trying to, and I've sat on that side of the table, where I offer up cuts for my department, and then they just take it and it goes in the general fund, and we don't see any of the benefit of those savings to reinvest in criminal justice reform. So give me a sense of how much we're saving and those pathways to those savings. How are we achieving those savings?
So I'm not going to give you an exact amount because I won't have that. It wouldn't be accurate.
Don't be afraid.
Okay. All right. But that being said, I think what we're doing is, and I'll give you an example of one thing we're doing is right now we're trying to do an analysis of trying to increase our pretrial services, sort of in anticipation of bail reform, to increase pretrial services for supervisory programs that will allow people to be supervised as opposed to incarcerated pretrial. And that's one of the programs that, to us, it's a reinvestment in looking at our resources and where it's going to go.
So if we could put quantitative analysis on that to say, we did X, we saved Y, and then some portion of that should be reinvested where it makes sense, I think that's the course we should pursue. We put forth a bill called, I forget, what was it called, Sam? Criminal Justice Reinvestment. And I know some of my colleagues are experts on budget analysis, and I want to go into that examination with you. But, however, and nevertheless, we should not disinvest in those processes that are reaping those savings. So it's good budgetarily, but it's also good for society. It's good for the taxpayer. It's good for the people who are trying to change their lives. So, I did not pursue that bill because I thought we could all get along and do it in goodwill. If we can do that earnestly, there's no need for a bill. However, to safeguard those kinds of directional changes that we have, we want to not penalize the folks that are finding the savings. Because we, sitting in this chamber, can't find a penny of the savings. Well, maybe some of us. But what I'd like to do is pursue it in a meaningful partnership that there's a win-win-win scenario. So I'm looking forward to that process and us trying to work on that. So particularly pretrial, if you look at the Washington, D.C. example, for the reduction in actual expenditures for sentencing and incarceration, they added, on the other side of the pendulum, services to make sure people don't reoffend. And your guys and gals and ladies and men, gender neutral, all have sharp pens, and they know where the money is, but I would be reluctant sharing that with outside bodies if I thought I was going to be penalized for it. So we have to create an environment where all parties benefit from those thoughtful savings, and that's where I'm at with that.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Heenan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam President, Howard, thank you for your testimony today, and your staff, executive staff, have done an incredible job serving our city, Philadelphia. My My question, because I've been around the MacArthur Criminal Justice Reform Partnership from the beginning through the last administration, and we're seeing results now as the data shows, and the cost savings, and for the betterment of the mission and the intent of the program. What happens when the grants run out for the MacArthur Grant Partnership, and how do we fund it moving forward to continue on with the progress?
I think, so I can't specifically answer your question right now, other than to say that I think it's something that we think about every day, and as we move forward, how we, it's exactly that, about how we look at what savings we have, where we move people around, how we do that. So I think if what MacArthur gives us is a foundation that hopefully we can do by moving resources around without having to ask. I think we all don't want to ask for more money to support those things, but at the same time, there are savings that we believe can be applied so that those types of reforms can continue.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Real quickly, just doubling back on some of the questions Councilwoman Councilwoman Reynolds Brown had that I had asked. Understand there's a $40.25 fee that is charged through Judicial Records fee schedule. Is that? Am I saying that right? Or again, I'm reading her question, so yeah. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I'm not familiar with that one in particular, no.
Okay. I'm going to ask the Councilwoman maybe she could follow up with you on that, because she wanted to know what those funds were used for, and obviously going back to her issue about the child care. And on that report that you're talking about, I think Judge Allen will part of that include looking into things like maybe foundations, things like that, where money could come from? Because again, on that whole child care issue.
So yes, we would always be interested in finding foundations or other funding available.
Okay, all right, okay. So again, when that
Right.
report comes in, that could go through the council president, and we'll spread it to the other council members. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Your Honor. Trying to figure who's next. Okay, Councilman Green, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to ask some additional questions based on some information just reviewing the budget. So I wanted to get some more perspective on the early bail review program that you talked about in your budget testimony. Can you give some more perspective on the type of charges are not eligible for EBR?
So my understanding is it has to do with the amount of, there are certain violent offenses that I think are excluded. I don't have that information right in front of me today, who are excluded from the early bail review.
So from looking at page 3 of your testimony, it looks like individuals within 1 to 5 days incarceration, individuals in custody at prison who have cash bail amounts of $50,000 or less are charged with nonviolent misdemeanors or felonies and have no holds or detainers are eligible for early bail review hearing.
Okay, and we just upped that to $100,000 or less.
Okay. Okay. All right. Also, talking regarding adult probation and parole department, and what steps are being taken to kind of reduce some of the caseload to get it closer to the national average?
Yes, we're trying to work on that. We're trying to work. I think right now, there is a real effort to look at probation and parole.
Mm-hmm. So what type of steps are you taking in that regard?
I think we're looking at it. We're trying to, I think they are, in fact, probation's trying to analyze what type of supervision individuals need.
Mm-hmm.
And as we look at the process of whether or not to terminate some probation so that it reduces the caseload. I think family courts really reduce the caseload tremendously, but the goal is to reduce that caseload.
Okay. And how does the role of automatic detainers factor in your ability to try to reduce the caseload?
Well, I think part of it is when you say automatic detainers, you mean the imposition of detainers by the probation officer? Well, I think the probation officers are trying to not use that detainer as their first resource, but to find other methods of supervision so as that they're not using it to just detain somebody because there's a violation, but to really look at it as to what's going on. For example, if the violation is something with drugs, then are they looking at what type of therapy that person's getting as opposed to simply lodging a detainer and placing them?
Follow up in that regard regarding adult probation and parole. On February 5th of this year, the Council Committee on Law and Government had a hearing regarding a number of matters. One of the issues that came up during that hearing was THC screens for individuals on probation and parole. And testimony that was offered by the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, as well as the District Attorney's Office, as well as Chief Defender Keir Bradford Gray, all raised several questions regarding the practice of screening people under supervision for THC. So my office sent a letter dated March 6 to First Judicial District, which we asked for responses by March 31st, anticipating we'll be having budget hearings. As of this date, we have not received any responses. So let me just state on the record, since I didn't get a written response to that letter that was also CC'd to other members of City Council who are on the Special Committee of Criminal Justice Reform, I'll just state some of the questions that we did not get a response to in writing. Number one, how many individuals are currently under county supervision? Number two, of those, how many are subject to THC screenings? Number three, at what intervals do such screenings take place? Number four, how many THC screenings are administered per year? And number five, how much does it cost the First Judicial District per test and annually to administer those screenings?
Councilman Green, could I have a copy of your letter because I did not receive it, and we'll get a response to you.
Okay. I mean, part of the reason why we did this, because I'm not new to this process, to try to get that information since it came out of the February 5th hearing, to get that information, and we thought we provided ample amount of time, about a month, to get those responses, so that way we would have information. If we need to follow up with you, we could follow up with you in a methodology and a process, not necessarily part of the budget hearing. Unfortunately, this causes that back and forth, and we don't really get a chance to have those questions asked and answered in a time that's timely. So for some reason, I'm not sure why that letter was not responded to. I think that may be the end of my questions. If I do have additional questions, I'm sorry, one other point I want to raise. In reference to bail commissioners, can you give me some perspective on your thoughts regarding bail commissioners? There's been a number of conversations and debates and meetings and city council hearings regarding cash bail. So I want to get your thoughts on cash bail. Other jurisdictions have eliminated cash bail. I don't get the sense that bail commissioners are using all the options that are available to them, but are relying heavily on cash bail. So can you give me your perspectives on that issue?
So I will give you the perspective that currently there is a suit pending in the Supreme Court regarding the bail commissioners, or arraignment magistrates, they're called now. So to some extent I can't comment. That being said, I believe there is a commitment by the First Judicial District to bail reform, and that includes the entire gambit of bail reform. And beyond that, it's hard for me to say anything more, because I think that's really the purview of municipal court. Although I will say, as Councilman Jones asked about what we were doing, one of the things with municipal court, with common pleas court, is increasing and starting to build PreTrial Services in anticipation of bail reform.
Is FJD a litigant in that matter? You said you can't comment on litigation.
The AOPC is, so I can't address, again, the individual bail, the ACLU filed an action against the magistrates, and that's being litigated, so I can't comment about them.
Well, you can't comment about maybe opinions on the case, but can you provide some context of what the complaint stated? And that's a matter of public record. I just don't have the information here. So
I don't have a copy of the complaint with me. It's public record, but there was an action, a mandamus action filed against those magistrates.
Right. So can you give a perspective of what was the nature of the mandamus action against the magistrates? What was the general theory?
The general theory was that they weren't following the law.
Oh, okay, that's pretty simple. All right.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask a question and follow up Councilman Green's question. Do we know the cost of parole supervision? Is that in your budget?
I do not have it.
It is in our budget. It's not specifically allocated, but we do have an overall number,
Do you have an idea what that number is?
probably $12 to $15 million for adult probation.
12 to 15 million a
Yes.
year? And do we have any people who are on probation greater than 3 years?
Anecdotally, I would assume yes, but I can't answer that question specifically.
I only asked that question because recently I heard that from a study, probation longer than 3 years may be just not effective, and maybe that needs to be revisited.
That study's been called to our attention.
Okay. And then I just want to make sure I understand the MacArthur grant in your testimony on page 2. It says the MacArthur grant started, I guess, in 2015. And it says here that it was awarded funding in 2015, 2016, and in 2018. Wasn't awarded funding in 2017?
There was a continuation of the initial grant for
Okay.
a second round of funding.
And wasn't awarded in 2019 either?
I'm not aware of any subsequent award now.
And is the total funding for those 3 years it was funded 7.65 million?
Yes,
And was that money used basically, as it says here, to implement, sustain initiatives geared to address the goals of the safety and justice challenge?
that's correct.
And so that would have a lot to do with what's going on State Road in our prisons at the time, right?
You mean the reduction?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm just doing some back-of-the-envelope math, and the cost of the prison system, which I've been talking about for 2 years in this chamber, with fringe benefits, has averaged between $360 million a year and $380 million a year. Now, if I multiply that by 5 years, that's between what, 1.75 and 1.9 billion dollars. And I just want to make sure that I'm clear. You're saying that you leveraged an investment of 7.65 million against 1.8 to 1.9 billion of 5 years of the costs of the prisons, and we're able to reduce the population, it says here, by like 44%. That's amazing that for 7.65 million, we affected 1.9 billion of 5 years of our budget and reduced the population by 44%. And I guess my concern is why are not our costs, why have they not been reduced by at least 20%? And I know there was a study done, but 4 years ago it was $44,000 per person on State Road. Today it's $84,000. And this may not be your area, but I think the investment of $7.65 million was tremendous against $1.9 billion. And when we say to ourselves, should we continue the 7.65? Absolutely. We should fund it out of our own budget if they don't fund it, because it's affecting so much, and it's dropped the population almost in half. What I'm frustrated by is why hasn't had an effect on the costs of operation. I'm not asking for a 50% reduction, but a 15 to 20% reduction should be appropriate. I'm just putting that on the record. I'm not asking you to comment, but I got to tell you that if we were in any entity together and we could leverage 7.65 million over 5 years against 1.9 billion of investment and get those kind of results, that's amazing. What I'd like to see is those savings be referenced in our budget, though. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. No further questions, Your Honor. Ms. Cross, everybody, thank you. Thank you for
you
your
so
time.
Very much.
What? It wasn't on. Councilman Jones?
Thank you. Really quickly, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are 44,000 people on parole or probation. Is that correct?
I think the number's a little lower, maybe as low as 39,000 right now.
And the per unit cost, per Councilman Dom's question, was about 42,000 a year in order to supervise them. Is that
I
correct?
think he was talking about incarceration costs, not probation
All right,
costs.
but Okay, so my question is the probation and parole supervision on average $42,000 a year?
I have no idea. I've
Okay.
never looked at it in those terms.
Okay, so I think we need to evaluate how our parole and probation, it's not just you, it's the state as well, because I don't know if that number is a joint number or a separate number, which we need to clarify.
Sure.
And if it is costing that much, we kind of could take a look at that and look for further savings. There are all kinds of studies that come out that say anything over 3 years is a waste. People, and you are the professionals. I do not pretend to know more than you, but I do have a responsibility to ask the question. And if indeed that is true, then what is the purpose of any probation without substantial violation lasting longer than 3 years? There is a direct correlation, as I understand it, that the probability of a technical violation beyond 3 years is probable. And so there are many critics that would suggest that that system is self-perpetuating, designed to keep as many people in that system for as long as possible to do that. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist, not at all, but objectively, I just need some answers to that. And if there isn't a better way to move that. You have some issues with caseload management. I like the fact that you have tiered supervision. You have larger caseloads for people who constitute less of a risk. You have an increased or diminished caseload for more supervision in the second tier, and then a really intense supervision for those people who constitute a real threat and major crimes as described. So I like all of that, but what I do need to know is if there isn't a better way to move people off of that system into productivity without, I mean, many people call it slavery. I mean, and I don't mean it in the racial sense. I mean it in the captive sense that it breaks up families. And I've heard story after story about that. So I think it's a time that has come that we take a look at that. And for my union friends that are probably listening, not designed to reduce staffing, but to alter how people that are at risk, if you can increase the supervision on people who really constitute a threat and reduce the caseload of those people supervising them, you can give more intense review of those people who need it. And then somebody who gets in a bar fight, me and Councilwoman Parker are arguing over a basketball game, and we got into it a little bit. The probability of us getting into another argument is little to none. So we don't need that much supervision. So I don't want to make knee-jerk reactions, because if you get it wrong, a great councilperson, Councilwoman Tasco, said, act in haste, repent in your leisure. I remember that. I want to look at it, however, with an eye towards how we alter it a bit, save a little bit of money, increase review for people who need it, and then let people join society that probably don't constitute as big a threat. And I don't think that's an unreasonable kind of direction for us to go in. And I'd love to hear your feedback.
Again, I think that's an issue that we're addressing, that we're looking at, and how we examine it. And when a judge sentences somebody to a probation and length, it's really up to the individual judge. So there's a lot of different components to that. But I think it's something that we're all looking at. Again, as I said earlier, the world has changed. And the issue, that study came out, and how we examine problems has really changed. So I think it's something that's ongoing. And I think everything you just said makes a very valid point.
So let me continue on the path of making sense. I want to thank your staff who are reviewing the risk assessment model which has impacts all across the board. Whether it's pretrial, whether it's no cash bail, all of these things will play a factor in giving a judge the proper tools to make a decision that is not necessarily as individual, but more of a model that we can use to go by that is driven by data and statistics. So if we can get there, then those decisions aren't arbitrary and capricious because, I know you guys are always having a great day, but every now and then,
Yeah, there's bad days.
yeah, there are bad days. And so if we can continue along that process, I think we will reap benefits throughout the system, from people who are dealing with probation and parole to people who have to pay for it. So,
Thank you, Council.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Taubenberger, you have a question?
Thank you very much. Your Honor, I have a quick question. Last year, City Council passed 2 bills pertaining to criminal trespass. In reality, it was individuals breaking into someone's home, and when confronted by police, they set up a homestead, really. These trespassers were claiming to be a tenant of the property and showing fake leases and all kinds of things. Just to clarify, City Council has no jurisdiction to regulate the CP civil rules of procedure, only the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court.
It's correct.
That is correct. Yes, because it is important. And have there been any more or an increased amount of hearings regarding this? Because it is a real...
So when you say increase hearings regarding this, the way a person would file something to have somebody who does not have the right to be in the property removed would be an action and ejectment. I do not have before me whether or not there is an increase in the number of ejectment actions, but I could get
Could you see if
I
there
could,
is?
but
Because
our ejectment actions don't necessarily distinguish between the scenario you described and any other type of ejectment that somebody may file.
Could they? Because there is a big difference. Councilwoman Parker went through great length to define this. I was a co-sponsor to that bill, as well as there was actually a previous bill which I supported as well, because in this realm, we have to do something, even though it's very, frustrating, and most people do not understand that the Supreme Court is involved in this.
Well, they're involved in the sense that they define the rules of procedure that we have to operate under. So, for example, one of the issues that came up is how you make service on the defendant who's now in that home, that illegally. And we are bound by the rules of civil procedure as to how service is effectuated on an individual. And that's one of the conflicts with it. So, yes, we could look into the OJR, our Office of Judicial Records, and ask them to try to find another way to identify those types of cases. We'd have to give it an identifier, and someone would have to be.
Because a landlord-tenant dispute is one thing, and I can understand why that has to be even taken further. But when someone is living in a house that is really yours and actually living in there, whether you're about to sell it or you're renovating it, or you might just be out on vacation, as some instances have been, that's very, very frustrating, and I think really needs to be pushed up a notch on the time frame.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. No further questions? Your Honor, once again, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.